So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to I think what might be the fourth TELCoP of the year. Can you believe that it is September already? We're getting very close to the end of 2024. It feels like it's gone very, very quickly. But
Michael, are you recording?
I am recording. Thank you for the reminder. I already had somebody ask me, "Hey, are you going to record this?" So thank you. We keep on going through with our TELCoP sessions, and our theme this year has been stuff that is a little more controversial. And so Robert and I talked a little bit earlier this year, and then Daryl did a boot camp on AI at the middle of the year. And then what we're doing is we have a courageous guest speaker from Massey University in New Zealand, who Robert and I both know really, really well, Dr. Vickel Narayan, who is one of our colleagues from Ascolite, which you might have heard Robert and I talk about before, and in particular the mobile learning SIG. But I'll get to that in a second. But what Vickel is going to talk about is he's going to talk to us a little bit about digital safety and fears related to digital sharing. And I sort of preempted this by saying this is a controversial topic because obviously this is something that's come up, at least in the Australian media, a lot recently. We're talking a lot about banning social media and how people are interacting with social media, in particular school children, and how they're interacting with social media. And so we thought it was noteworthy to talk to Vickel about this. And his area is mobile learning and mobile devices and technology enhanced learning. And so he's got some thoughts about this. And we're going to run this one a little bit more like we usually run a TELCoP, in that Robert is going to do some of the interviewing, and I'm going to do moderation for the chat. But Vic might also show us a few things as we go along as well. So I'll stop sharing my screen. So if he's got something he wants to show us, he can. But it is more of an interview. And I always tell our TELCoP participants that they don't need to prep a complicated presentation. We will ask them the questions, and it is more interview style. But let's do what we usually do and talk very quickly about what the TELCoP is and who we are, just in case anybody in the audience doesn't know us. And we start, as always, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And as you would well know, if you've seen me talk before, I am on Gumbear land, currently on the Gold Coast. If I was in Brisbane, it would be the Yagara or the Turrbal people in Brisbane. So I acknowledge all of those traditional elders, past, present, and emerging. And as I always say, because we're CQU, there could be many, many different elders. This is a little bit about the TELCoP. I don't usually read this one except to show it to you. It really is about best practice in technology enhanced learning. How can technology improve your classroom practice? And how can we talk about technology and students and how those things work together? And I think this particular topic fits into that really well. And I should remind you, as I always do, that all of the episodes of this of the TELCoP are on YouTube. And as Dale rightly pointed out at the beginning, we are recording this one as well. So with Vickel's permission, we will put this one on YouTube as well. If you search Professor Tex TechTube on YouTube, you will find the TELCoP playlist, and there will be all of those videos going all the way back to 2020 when we renamed this to the TELCoP from the previous name. So who's going to talk to you today? Well, you're going to hear from Vickel, obviously, who I'll talk about in a second. But the other people that are involved in our COP is Robert, who is going to do the interviewing for us. He is a senior lecturer does it say senior? It does say senior lecturer, a good senior lecturer in educational psychology in the School of Education and the Arts here at CQ University. A whole bunch of different accolades there on the slide. And I always mention a committed Bundaberg native. One day he's going to wear his Bundaberg rum polo shirt for us, or drink from his Bundaberg rum cup. He has both, Byron. I know, I see you laughing, but he genuinely has both. And so he is a committed Bundaberg native. Then there's me. My name's Michael Cowling. I'm an associate professor in ICT in our School of Engineering and Technology here at CQU. Again, you can see all of my various accolades. The thing that people usually call me when they're, depending on whether they want to suck up to me or tease me, is Professor Tech. I do a whole bunch of stuff with school kids in VR, but most of you know that already. If you look behind me closely, at some point you might see the Professor Tech pillow on the couch, where I got the logo printed on the pillow. And then the other champion, who I'm not sure if he's here or not today, but he came and did our last session, is Daryl Clare. Daryl Clare is a doer. He's driving our sort of doing stuff with virtual reality. He is substantively a lecturer in paramedic science, but has spent time seconded to ITD and various other places at our university talking about using technology to support learning, innovative technology to support learning. And that's definitely what Daryl does. And if you were at our last session, they talked a lot about how we might use technology in our research as well. So I strongly encourage you, if you've got some ideas about how you might want to use technology, Daryl's your guy at CQU to talk to. He will give you lots of practical ideas about how to use this stuff. But our guest of honor today is Vickel, as I said, from Massey University. There's his official bio that I pinched from I think it was a Massey University website. A whole bunch of different accolades there, including 80 research articles, 50 conference contributions, apparently a best paper, and some learning and teaching excellence awards as well. A journal called PJ-TEL, the International SOTEL Symposium. But as I said, the way that Robert and I know Vickel definitely is through Askellite and through the mobile learning SIG, where we work with him fairly closely, thinking about technology enhanced learning and how mobile learning is going to make the world a better place, or not, as the case may be. And so I'm very excited to have Vickel here, especially dialing in all the way from New Zealand, which is a little bit further ahead in time than us. They're in the future. And so he's gonna have to dash off and pick up the kids, but he's made time for us before that to talk a little bit about technology and digital fears and digital safety and all of those kinds of things. So what I usually do here before I'm going to hand over to Robert is I look for a silly photo. I dig through my photo album. I go, do I have a silly photo of this person? Vickel's done pretty well. I did find one where I managed to have snapped a photo of you in the middle of eating something, Vickel, and I was going to put that one up, but instead I decided I would put this one up here. This was at the Askellite conference in 2022. At the end of the Askellite conference, we do the handover to the conference organizing committee for 2023. Our conference organizing committee for 23 was in Christchurch. We ran the conference in Christchurch in 23. And so this is the people that were at the 22 conference, sort of waiting to be handed over the conference for 2023. I think they look pretty damn nervous, and I actually think Vickel looks pretty damn nervous there on the end. It went off well, Vickel. You should not have been nervous at all. I think it went really, really well. But I like the apprehension on his face in that particular photo. So yeah, doing that Vickel's like, I'm not apprehensive, Mike. I'm excited.
We obviously had no idea what was coming our way. So I don't think, other than Tom, who has actually been part of a organizing committee before, none of us actually had done one before. This was going to be our first one. So yes, you could see how sort of we've got different faces, but
Yes.
underlying thing was this is really happening now.
Is that Meredith on the end with her hand up like this? I think
That's Catherine.
Catherine. Oh, it's Catherine. Well, Catherine did a lot of the organizing, so I understand the look. Okay, there we go. So anyway, I'm going to stop sharing the slides, but like I said, I usually finish with a silly photo. Let me find the stop sharing button. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Robert. As I said to you, this one is a interview style. So what Robert's going to do is he and Vickel are going to have a bit of a conversation, a bit of an interview style conversation. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat. And what I will do is every now and again, I will I might put my hand up and sort of interrupt and say so-and-so has a really interesting question in the chat. And so Robert's interview questions are just a prompt, but we will have a bit of a conversation as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Vanderberg to get us started.
So this might be an interview style and or a conversation style, because this topic is something that Vickel and I have been together working, discussing, workshopping, interacting with for about 6 months, trying to put forth a paper, a position piece, if we will, out there about ways to help assist youth developing in a digital era. So I want to let Vickel say anything he wants to share about himself and his background and where he kind of sees himself in this venue before we kind of start a conversation. So if you want to share with anything, Vickel, before we start.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Mike. And thanks everyone for having me. Kia tato from across the ditch from New Zealand, as Mike said. And I guess it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be here and to be talking about a topic which we sort of all dwell on and we talk about, or if we don't talk about, we continuously think about. And I think it's one of those tough conversations that Mike alluded to before that we probably need to have on a daily basis, either with our class, our kids. And I've got a 6-year-old turning 7 this month, and we started this journey quite early. So a bit about me, my undergrad was in computer science. I actually did computer science and information system. And while I was finishing my degree, I also had a part-time job, full-time job, which was actually programming. And by the time I finished my undergrad degree, I totally figured out that this wasn't my thing because being stuck behind a computer was not me. So I actually did some soul searching and I decided to join education. So I started as a secondary school teacher, high school teacher, and then worked myself across to higher education, which is where I've been since. Finished my master's, which was in virtual worlds. Back then, it was quite crazy, and it has made a comeback again now with generative AI and all sorts of virtual worlds now. And I did my PhD indeed in social media and mobile devices. That was looking at how we could use it for education, for learning and teaching. And this was one of the things that I covered. I wouldn't say this is my expertise, but it's one of the things that you have to dwell in and talk about and know about in order to embrace what social media and mobile technologies actually really do offer us in academia. So just framing it, we talk about social media, but for me, social media is almost synonymous with mobile devices because they really do go hand in hand. Quite a lot of things are quite well complemented, either in good ways or bad ways. And also, like I said, social media does have quite a lot of affordances. It has its own unique pedagogies for learning and teaching, and it does offer us quite unique opportunities to revisit and re-envisage what education could look like. But today's talk is actually really getting to know the challenges and some limitations that we do need to acknowledge and know about in order to embrace what social media offers us in our life, but also in academia. Rob?
So, well, let's introduce where we started with this. Vickel and I were both very interested in what is it like to develop in this world where the mobile devices create a whole world students are manifested in. And so I wanted to kind of get your views first before I start chiming in or anything. But Vickel, we had talked about what is part of the view you are interested in developing for schools and places to help them understand how to manage this concept that young kids have these devices and have a separate world on them. And in a world in which what we want to do is in one vein of the world is just tell them they can't have them in schools and that they should have them outside. That there's no cell phones in schools whatsoever, no mobile devices in schools, except for school approved and blocked devices, if you will. And you kind of have a stance on that idea.
I do. Can I share my screen? So I think Mike did allude to this before, when he was introducing us in the topic today. But there's quite a lot happening in terms of social media platforms and mobile devices in Australia, but also here in New Zealand. So our government actually early this year banned mobile phones in schools, and I think it's the same in Australia. Australia is considering banning social media platforms for teenagers between 13 and 14. So that's the context. And I think for me, where I'm coming from is my perspective. So before I actually go on to that, this is just recent. It came out today, I think. Today's the 16th. Yeah. 17th. So this was yesterday, that because of the mobile phone ban in one of the schools, well, actually it's all across New Zealand, but one of the schools are reporting that for the first time in many years, the school actually has seen quite a lot of talk, and even one of the windows was broken with a rugby ball. And that they have actually seen that for the first time in many years, because now kids are not glued to their screens, and that they're actually talking to each other. But also just moving forward, because I think there's quite a lot of interconnected factors here that these interim policies are trying to address. And I think it's not for the good. That's where I am coming from. And I actually take the approach that World Garden has a place, but we also need to embrace what that safety that we get within the World Garden approach to build the confidence of our learners. So I did a bit of homework. So a bit of stats here. This is what basically is coming through, and this is from Australia. So it's from Australia, very similar, probably will be in New Zealand as well. There quite a lot of things happen in the cyberspace or digital space. Bullying, quite a lot. 53% of the learners or young Australians have said they've been bullied online. Uh, more than one in three have experienced some sort of trolling online. 43% have had some sort of negative experience online, and 21% of Australians, and I'm sure that state is quite relatable in New Zealand as well, they've experienced some sort of harassment. And an average is about 15 hours a week on social media platforms, and presumably most of that is on their mobile device. What they've also done is the actions they've taken to look after their well-being or digital well-being is they've blocked about 50% of the people who were bullying them or whatever they were doing. 40% have actually spoken with their loved ones or family or friends, and 40% have actually made formal complaints. Let me see what's on the next slide. Yes, I think my biggest problem is when we talk about digital, we actually divide some of the experiences which are quite relatable, some of our values and principles which are relatable in a physical space. When we say digital, we somehow reconceptualize that space as being very different. So we place a different expectation on us and our learners. And I think that creates a bit of a divide. And my gripe here is that maybe there is quite a lot to be learned and borrowed across if we actually try and merge the two spaces whenever it's appropriate. So I think I also have some stats over here. So I'll share my screen again. So just trying to do a bit of background, looking around at what's happening in schools. And I think Rob, you and I actually talked about this. This is actually the digital curriculum or digital technologies curriculum across year 1 to year 13 or year 10. And if you actually look, this is Australian digital technologies curriculum. And if you look at what's happening across years 1 to 10, you'll see that students are actually engaging with quite a lot of data management, but that's data management from a business perspective, safeguarding data, storing data, and manipulating data, running analytics. But nowhere in this curriculum from year 2 to year 10, you'll see that learners are actually engaging about themselves and what's relevant in a digital space. So when it comes to cyberspaces, social media, and mobile phones, you'll actually see none of that. So my thing when I was talking to Rob about was this whole thing about values and principles. So where do we actually learn about what values should we embrace and what principles should we be learning about when we are in school, and also build on that when we actually enter tertiary education? Rob, I think you had a few things to add there.
Yeah, well, and this is where Vickel is a great guy. So, and he knows me. So we get to have this very heavy, discourseful, loving conversation that can kind of be viewed. So if it sounds like I'm being harsh, it's just my New York nature, and Vickel's used to me. But see, Vickel's main premise, and that's why we wanted this as a conversation, is that, you know, teachers need to help guide students through these devices and developing these values. And I'm of the extent that that's near impossible. Because you're asking teachers to develop something that they themselves don't understand, they themselves are not trained in. And in addition, they have to now add this to the curriculum they already have. And so we've been debating about an idea of maybe developing a group that goes to schools to help train and develop steps and procedures. But my first question for Vickel, and I find this one to be very interesting. How are we going to develop a priori good set of values in what is essentially the Wild West of values, metaphorically, right? Because we're saying we're going to teach these kids to have a values and then go off into this digital space where most of the people, adults in that place, have no values. How?
Yes, okay. I'll share my screen again, 'cause I think one of the problems that we have is the concept that we have digital natives. And with digital native, what we have been told is that these kids who are born during certain times, they somehow know how to use these tools. And what it really does is it actually alienates people, and in many cases, academics who think they are not one of them, and hence it's not their responsibility, and even to an extent, parents who see themselves as a non-native, and hence they see this is not something I need to know. So we have to reconceptualize that whole understanding of what digital native means. So Prensky actually came up, Matt Prensky came up with that concept in the early 2000s, and he said, well, these are digital natives and they know everything that because they're born with the technology. Actually, quite a lot of research, and Prensky himself debunked his own theory about natives, digital natives, and said, well, actually, it's doing more harm than good. So I think that's first stereotypical sort of thinking or narrative we need to break and have a counter narrative too, because I think it's creating a bit of a this delusion that, well, these kids know more than me, and immediately we find ourselves as academics or even parents on the back foot thinking that we can't add anything that they don't already know. Well, that's not true. What we can add is that sort of critical, whatever governs us in our physical world. And that's where I'm saying that we need to break that binary, that digital means strictly digital and physical means strictly digital, because it's not the case. I'll share my screen. A better way to look at this whole sort of narrative about digital native is, or being a digital native, is reframing that as a visitor and a resident. And if you actually track yourself or plot yourself on this axis, y and x axis, you'll find that all of us are actually using something which is digital, which is to some extent social, and we are either visitors. So if I had to say visitor, I would say, well, I don't really use Facebook. I just visit it just to see what family and friends are up to. If I'm a resident, I'll probably say Twitter was my platform up until Elon Musk bought it, and now it's pretty much a platform that I visit. But my resident app or platform now is LinkedIn. And so that's connected to this whole thing. Well, we need to break this barrier that, well, no, it's not the teenagers who are struggling this, and it's not us who don't know this, but this is a collective thing that we need to explore together. So it's also going back to the notion of, so we all know that we have to teach to a prescribed course outline. It has certain course learning outcomes, and that's what pretty much we are bound by. But I have to say, every program has a graduate profile or a graduate attribute that we're working towards. And most of them actually do focus on collaboration, on communication, those sort of broad skills, important skills. And I think we can build that because we know what collaboration looks like in a physical space, and we almost undermine or somehow have this narrative that the online collaboration space is second to a physical space. I think we can do a better job of building in that sort of digital space and the affordances into what we say collaboration looks like. That's just an example in the whole program. So I think what we're trying to do here is build things in rather than doing it as a plug-on, because when it comes to technology, anything that's plug-on never works because it never gets the importance or the emphasis it should get. Mike.
So, in your experience doing your doctorate and working in the mobile learning space, I think it's interesting what you're saying, that you see that divide. You talked about it. Digital is digital and physical is physical. Is that true with mobile learning as well? I don't feel like it is as strongly true. And I suppose my question to you is, why do you think there's a difference there that people make that distinction for social media, as somebody who's worked in both areas?
I think it's because something that we have all lived through, and digital has come into existence through our lifetime. So if you go back, the earliest that my encounter with the internet was Yahoo or Netscape actually, and that was just Netscape with an email. But we've all grown with these new versions of what the internet looks like. So we have this concept that it's something that dwells on the outer. It's not integrated in our everyday life. When we actually look at it, it is. And you're right, Mike, that mobile phones actually weave these spaces into a seamless sort of experience. But I think what I'm talking about here is that conceptual shift that we need to make. When we look at concepts like collaboration, we mostly as academics, and this has been my experience, think about collaboration in a classroom because, well, that's the device of the technology we have, is that all the learners are in a space, and hence this is what collaboration looks like. But collaboration in an online space is equally powerful, if not more so, when it's embraced in the right way, and it helps learners build those sort of skills that we need more so now. Because we are not talking about problems now, we're actually talking about wicked problems and problems we don't know about. And I know people know about generative AI, and it's creating problems we didn't even foresee or exacerbating it even further. So how do students actually think about these problems and relate them to how they're actually growing to be and become as global citizens, while also being aware, like, yeah, okay, I'm engaging in these things. What is my role here in towards being an actor in these big problems? Sorry, Rob.
No, you're fine. One of my struggles, and I'm a developmental psychologist, and you guys are all techies. And Michael brings me into these worlds where these techies invent these phrases, and I wonder if they understand the wherewithal they're putting them. I struggle with digital citizen and I struggle with digital native. These are terms that a new technology has invented, and we want to separate these individuals from, like, every individual develops and grows, and the only thing that changes is when and where they grow, right? Like, that's the way in which humans develop differently, right? We all are going to learn language. We've discerned that. It's where will we learn the language and what's the language going to be, right? So when we say a digital native, nobody said that there was a Renaissance native, the industrial native. Kids growing up during the Industrial Revolution had a whole different view of the way in which the world was going to work and be. The realization that I was going to leave the farm, and the parents had no understanding of that design or pressure, but we didn't create a term that now says there's some sort of different being. Like, I think about even in my youth, right? My dad didn't really understand why I could sit and watch the same movie over and over again, right? If you grew up when we could watch movies over, and I to this day don't know how I do it. Like, I can't, but we had HBO, and so they would show the same movies over and over again. Most kids from my generation can remember watching the same movie hundreds of times. We can all quote lines from movies, right? But we weren't given this term, right? But we were interacting with the world differently than the people before us. And that's what every generation does. They all interact with the world differently than the world before them. And there is always going to be some sort of combative conversation about how I'm interacting with the world, with my understanding of growing in that world versus your interacting of seeing the world as you've already grown up. Like, you know what I mean? And so the parents of the 40s and 50s didn't understand the kids of the 50s and 60s, and the 50s and 60s parents didn't understand the kids of the 60s and 70s, and we could just keep going on to every generation. But for some reason, we don't just want to say these kids are growing up in a different generation with a different set of technologies than any of us ever had. We want to call them some sort of qualitatively different thing, label them as a different thing, and give them a psychosis over this thing. I'm a digital native.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to use a TV any different than my parents did, but I interacted with the TV differently than my parents did, because the way in which their youth and the way in which that thing was meant, my mom still tells me, and I've talked to other people from generation before me, the TV was much more of a social endeavor when they first had it, because if you had it, the whole family would watch it together. And my generation, the TV became an individualized development. Having my own TV, I watched my own shows. We didn't watch all this stuff as a family. That it was a movement away from that, with the way in which we interacted with it. And I want to know, like, do you think this is part of the problem, right? You're trying to separate worlds by, people have already created a world and put kids in there and said that there's some sort of digital native when they're just a kid growing up and they have phones.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying, that when Prensky did come up with that whole sort of collective labeling of certain age group as digital native, well, it floated for many years, and people really took that on board until, well, people said, actually, no, it's actually doing more damage. And so there were studies coming out saying there is nothing different between what you're saying. So the year you were born doesn't define what you're capable of when it comes to digital platforms. And so that was debunked. But the problem is with any narrative or any story like that is that it lives forever until people really engage with it and go, well, actually, no, this is more detrimental. A classic example of what's happening right now is the whole generative AI ecology that's emerging. Who's the native there? No one is. Who could be the natives? We all could be. Who chooses to be in that space? You'll be surprised. But these are not teenagers or young people. These are actually people who actually have good jobs. They are probably our age, my age, who are now using these tools to increase productivity and make their life easy. But see how big a damage this whole labeling does. Well, we have a group of people who really don't know how to use it. So my experience using mobile social media for learning was the students, so this was a first year journalism course, the students knew the platform, but when we said, let's use it for learning, they said, how do we do that? We only know social stuff. We only know how to send photos and messages, but how do we use it for learning? And that's a classic example of the damage that labeling does. So on the first hand, here are a group of people who know how to use it effectively. They might be a bit hesitant to engage with it to begin with. And then on the other side, we've got a group of people who are not afraid to use it, or most of them are not, but they don't know how to use it. So it is exactly what you're saying, Rob. There is value to be had in breaking these sort of labels because no one is gaining from it. In fact, it's doing more damage.
One of the things that, to support what you're saying, that I've always struggled with is we take these things that are developed for a marketing / business / entertainment component, and then we go, well, why don't people use this to learn, right? So we're going to create the National Geographic channel, or we're going to create all these channels on TV. It's like a past technology, so people could go on there and learn. And a very small percentage of the people did it. And basically, for those channels to exist, they had to go, yeah, we can't teach people anymore. Let's just make up things and just create channels that are interesting and entertaining, but no longer educational. And that's where the whole True TV industry, that whole National Geographic producer who decided to move them away from educational stance, and they then became this large scale thing. They even still talk about Shark Week would be one good example of where they decided to make education out of it. But then they realized it was bored, so they had to create a shark that didn't exist, that became the most interesting part of Shark Tank, was to create non-educational content. And I think we want to go and tell these kids, and I think that's our downside as educators, right? We always want to take these media platforms, these technologies, and say that we want to tell them how to use them to learn, when the reality is they are all using them to learn. It's just they're using it to learn in a way we're not aware of what they're learning, or are we interested in what they're learning?
We'll come back
Because,
to it, Rob.
yeah.
I think Mike has a question or something.
I wanted to comment on I'm going to ask Angelique's question in a second as well, but I love that you're throwing Mark Prensky under the bus. I love that, and I think that's actually really noteworthy. And I typed in the chat VHS kid when Robert was talking about how he, as a kid of the whatever it was 70s, you know, sort of was sitting in front of the telly watching TV or VHS, and it's odd that we never. I don't think parents ever sort of said, well, oh, Rob's sitting in front of the TV. I don't know what he's doing. And they just wash their hands of it. But we seem to do that with technology. And I don't really understand why we do. And Vickel, I think you're sort of throwing Prensky under the bus in a way and saying, well, it's this segregation. It's this digital native thing. But the question I wanted to ask that which kind of links to what Angelique said in the chat is, if you were stuck in the elevator with the Minister for Education for New Zealand education, would you say to him, no, don't? You should stop banning mobile phones, but you should stop banning social media because, as Angelique says, it's about how people use it. Shouldn't we use these new tools effectively, and banning them is what's your position on the whole banning thing? If I
But
can be so bold as to ask.
yes, now my position is, and I think that's why I hate the opening. I think banning is an interim solution. It comes probably out of fear and what people are generally talking about, and there's some value in that. But I think while we're banning these platforms, we have to face the reality that while we're banning it during school hours, it does not stop the kids from using it after school, or even if they finish school, at some point they will engage with these platforms. So the problem is, unlike electricity, radio, television that came before all the other technologies, and even the first version of the web, with what we have now is we do leave a digital footprint, which comes to bite us at some point. I mean, if you look at Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, you know the story with him. He posted something when he was a teenager partying, and when he became the Prime Minister, you know, it became a huge point of discussion. On the other hand, Justin Bieber was discovered on YouTube. I mean, he wouldn't be who he is today if it wasn't for YouTube. So going back to your point, Mike, yes, I don't think banning is the solution. We need to embrace these platforms, these new environment and spaces that the students, even adult learners, are going to be living in. And I think ethically we're bound to be working with them in cultivating a sort of a values framework, or maybe principles of what it is that you need to be doing to protect your online identity. And I was quite amazed, Mike, because when you said you were looking for a funny photo of me and you couldn't find it. Well, it is intentional. It didn't happen by itself. I actually go through I Google myself and I see what's out there, in especially photos, and then I see what's up and I take them down, because that's part of, see, this is what I'm talking about. So if you look and or talk to or know any employer, any big firm, you go, okay, well, if you have a job vacancy and say, for example, Mike applied for it, before they even get to know Mike in person, they will Google you. They'll see, okay, what has Mike been doing? So the first encounter with Mike is part of that whole process of recruiting Mike has been, they got to they got to know about Mike and who Mike is by looking for their online identity. And that's the biggest value we have when we work with our students in embracing these platforms the right way. And there's enough opportunity within the school system, even from early years, to actually cultivate these sort of practices. I'll give you an example. My 6-year-old, she's in year 1, she's in year 2, equivalent to year 1 in Australia, and they have this school philosophy or school values, and they talk about kindness, respect. They talk about communication, and these are not values just for physical spaces. They could very easily be translated into an online space. I mean, the states I showed you about cyberbullying, if we knew some idea of what respect or kindness was in an online space, and I know if you talk to someone who has actually been a bully online and you ask them if you do it, will you do it in front of the person in a face-to-face space? They'll probably say no. So why is it that it's acceptable in an online space and not acceptable in a digital space? So I think these are the sort of barriers that we need to break down. It's like, well, kindness is kindness. Doesn't matter where you are, whether you're online or in a physical space. Respect is respect. Doesn't matter where you are.
But Vickel, I do think, to be unfair, what you're saying is like teaching kindness and respect at elementary levels. And I'm a secondary teacher, and you were a secondary teacher. The schools don't have these same values and things because it's very unclear. It's very, once they get to this striving into figuring out what an adult means, what is kindness is not a simple black and white like it is for an elementary kid. And these things become vague and they become unclear. And so we struggled all the time with bullying in high school because one of the struggles is sociologically, we do use social pressure to get people to become socialized. And that's one of the arguments that has been misappropriated through the digital sphere. And what they say is, so we're supposed to do this. So online we can do it, but really, really to the extreme of craziness. We get to judge people's actions in a social sphere, partially because there's no observing who's doing the judging and that safetiness. I worry, back to what I was going to say, is like, there's this, I mean, kids were bullied on the playground, but we never got rid of the playground. We didn't say, well, if that's where they're bullied, we're going to get rid of it, right? Because kids were bullied in sports. So we didn't say, you know what, we're going to get rid of sports. And so we're now going to go, well, these kids are bullied on the phones. So we're going to get rid of the phones. And it's none of that is ever, and what we realized as back in the day was this: kids are going to do bad things and we can't take everything away from them. Now, what I see happening is the biggest reason I think people are actually trying to do the ban of phones is teachers have historically throughout time been very bad at classroom management. That's the number one problem that we see in schools when we go and observe, right? Because we can't observe learning, but we can observe classroom management. And what happens is phones become a way to demonstrate that kids aren't focused, they're not interacting, and the classroom management isn't being done well. So we'll get rid of the phones. And then now the kids have to pay attention, right? Because what we'd rather is that they're spacing out and looking like they're paying attention than spacing out and looking like they're on a cell phone, right? So we're managing that. Because there's nothing to show that banning phones from school stops cyberbullying at all.
There's a bit of an irony there, because if you ban cell phones, it doesn't mean that students still don't have access to messages or the instant messaging or the push notifications, because, well, phone is one part of the same ecology. So if the phone is away and you have a laptop, you can still access and get everything and do almost exactly the same thing without your phone. So in some ways, banning phones do not really help with anything if you still have access to the internet or the computer, because messages do flow quite seamlessly between platforms.
Yeah, you can actually send your messages from your phone to your computer. I do it. And
Yeah.
my computer is my phone.
Yep. I think the problem here is that, unlike if we got bullied and before the phones, no one really recorded it. So you lived that trauma and you lived it on the day, and then you'd actually make things and you'd put strategies in place to cope with the trauma. Whereas what we're seeing now is when it's captured on a phone, it actually, you relive the same trauma over and over and over again. And what makes it worse are people who start commenting on the same thing. So you basically, you have the trauma, and the trauma is made worse by people who actually don't know the nuances of what happened and what eventuated, and hence it becomes a very prevalent and ongoing problem, which relates back to the stats I shared that, oh, what students are bullied, and there is a digital well-being theme that's emerging now, mostly because of the pandemic, that, well, we need to safeguard who we are in a digital space, and more importantly, our well-being. and our mental well-being. Yeah,
So,
sorry, mate.
so Angelique made that point in the chat. She said that we always had bullying, same as what you just said, but in social media makes bullying more public. And that kind of addresses the optics thing that Robert was talking about as well, which is why schools want to ban it, you know, because I've seen that, right, in Australia. The hidden reason why all these schools want to ban social media is because they don't like the videos of their school going out on social media. Let's be honest, right?
Bundy High, when those kids were
Yeah.
beating one kid
Yeah,
up.
there's one down here as well. Yeah. But the Ricky then says in the chat, so then it should be about how to use them safely. And you just, oh, I got balloons. There we go. And then you just made this point as well, right? It's about coaching kids on well-being and safety. You're obviously not you're against the bans overarching, but you also sort of recognize that cyberbullying could be worse because it's public. So how do we coach them? And maybe I'm asking you a difficult question there. How do we coach them on being more safe without banning things necessarily?
That's actually a good question, and let me see if I can share what I was saying. So,
And then
and
just to add to that, so Vickel can answer with this. Continue. We're all assuming that the cyberbullying is done by their peers in schools, not like some entity that is not even interactive in their school, right? Because there's a lot of cyberbullying done by people that are not even at their kids' ages, all these other things. And they're in reality, you can't teach those people anything, right? So that we're always assuming that cyberbullying is only done by the other people in the school, the other students.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
it
Vickel.
depends on the space. But Mike, I'll go back to the question you asked me. Say, if I was stuck in the lift and I was with the Minister of Education Minister of New Zealand, what would I say? I would say my biggest gripe will be that our education system still very much focuses on the outer. And I think we're at a juncture now where we need to focus on the inner. So while the out is more important, so how do we aid to the business economy and the whole growing sort of working with businesses, and there's another element that we as in our education system really do not talk about, which is our inner being. And it comes back to who we are as a person. I think that's more important now, because if we don't know who we are, I normally give an example to my students. It's like driving a car on the road without a license. Like you really don't know, or even the road, you know. So where are you going? You're aimless. And if you don't know who you are, and these are broad principles, like we start talking about these things in many ways, intrinsically or more implicitly with our kids. Now we do it with Mara. We do talk about what is it that makes us us, what is good, what is bad behavior. And I think that's something our education system also needs to focus on, because we are no longer trying to, as literature says, make a burger, or the McDonald's model that we order here. You go through this, you put the burger, you put the lettuce, and then the tomato, and the cheese, and whatever the patty is, and then the top, and you come out of that system with a certificate saying you can make a burger now. We're past that point. And I think generative AI is actually making this more clear for us, that we need to change our focus from mostly being on the out to in, because if we don't, we will very easily and quickly lose autonomy over our own thinking and our own rationality. Because with all these platforms, what will slowly happen is it will homogenize, and we will all start learning the same stories, the same narrative. And that is going to become a bigger problem. I'll quickly share my screen. Now, I talk to my students about this. Now, this what I'm sharing here is, it has got nothing to do with digital well-being. This actually comes from doing research for good. So this is a framework for doing research for good for academics in academia. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to reframe how we look at our publication and our research, which is totally quantified in terms of citation count and what you're doing, to actually making it more meaningful at a human level. So they're talking about things like equity. Now, ask yourself, when have we actually ever talked about equity in our courses? I know every course has this element. We don't talk about it, or at least in the program, we can talk about this thing. Of being the importance of openness, or collegiality, soundness, and community. There's actually a proper website here which talks about where and how they come up with these. And whenever I look at this and I'm going, this could be something that we can talk about across, like I was saying, the graduate profile or the graduate attributes. They're very clearly aligned with these things. So if we look at soundness, I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, Donald Trump obviously is doing it for his own good. I think to some extent he probably has an idea what he's talking about, but I actually suspect he doesn't. So he just blabs out whatever comes to his mind. But where is his ethics, you know? Where is his transparency? Where is the accountability? Just to give you a very bad example. But then I came across Elon Musk who's doing it. I mean, he is a guy who actually is trying to change the world, but where is his accountability? If you know about X, there was a person on Twitter whose username was X. When he rebranded Twitter to X, he simply just took his username. He just took it. So that's the basic level of humanity. Would you do that? That's like snatching something from a person in the park or in the mall. So this is how rife these problems are. But I'm saying we can connect quite a lot of what we do with our learners, regardless of primary school, secondary, or tertiary, with some of these values, because they do align with the graduate attribute. I've lost my train of thought here.
No, that was a good place to stop. And
Yeah, well, just I agree with your inner, and I'll just add the last part. I think we need to spend more time not teaching inner people how not to be bullies. Because what we end up teaching is people that don't already want to bully how not to be bullies. We don't really tend to teach those that want to bully how not to bully, right? Because they just ignore us. But we need to spend more time on the inner with teaching how to survive in a world where bullies might exist. And we all have, you could look at as a theme for like 80s and 90s, tons of films with how do you manage being bullied as a person? How do you get through it? One of the reasons we all agreed with the Breakfast Club, right, was because the reality was they were all bullied in a different way at a different time, at a different place. And we all could fit with one of those, and how we all overcame whatever that bullying was. I think we're trying to just eliminate these things and do these things until we figure out a system and a way to help kids learn how to overcome being bullied diligently. Because the reality is, it only bullies you if you care about what it means. Like if you just say, I'm just getting rid of TikTok, that guy was mean. Boom. It's literally done. Now, the problem is somehow in their world, their mind, they've realized if I get rid of this thing, my whole life ends.
Yeah, but the problem with social media is you're not bound by that one-to-one relationship, and it's one-to-many. So if you try, like I tried to ditch Facebook, I can't because I'm unfortunately stuck. That's where all my friends and families are. So even when I want to ditch it, I can't. And so that's the
Funny how we used to be able to communicate with family before that, and somehow we can't go back.
yes. So I really don't.
Convinced ourselves we can't
Yeah.
go back.
But Rob, that was another point, that sometimes it's not up to, like, we really don't have a choice. It becomes a platform, like, so really getting to know the platform, because sometimes the platforms really impose the sort of behavior unknowingly. And so we don't always know that. I mean, I normally ask my students, do you remember why you signed up for Facebook? Did you actually have a really good reason why you signed up for Facebook? And none of them actually do. The only reason most of the time here is the same as mine is, well, my friends were there, my family members were there, so they sent me an invite and going, well, they're all there, so let's join it.
Yeah.
So it's not a conscious sort of decision that we may need to make. But the problem is we are inheriting this problem because there's a knowledge gap. We have let this knowledge gap widen because we haven't really tried to address it. And with every technology and the rate at which it develops, there will always be a knowledge gap. So these bullies that emerge, they don't just emerge out of the blue. It has taken them time to actually basically cultivating that mentality that it's okay because no one is going to see it, no one is going to do anything about it. And we don't have the knowledge or the ability to actually be able to discriminate and go, what do I do here? We're only learning about this. Now, I'll give you an example. Facebook, it took regulatory bodies 15 years to force Facebook. We don't even have it here. Now we do. force Facebook to give you access to your own data. It took 15 years for the European Union to force them to
Yeah.
give you access to your own data. That's 15 years. And we are talking about one platform. And so with generative AI and everything that's coming now, that's actually going to be a bigger problem, because misinformation and disinformation is
Yeah.
going to be more rife, because I think it relates back to quite a lot of things we were talking.
So we have to wrap this up. So we do our 10-question TELCoP. So you got to try to do they're meant to be somewhat fast, so it won't take us 4 minutes. So we ask you our 10 questions to learn more about Vickel. So what is your favorite technology word?
Favorite technology word? I think the word affordances always surprises me.
Affordances.
Yes, because it has quite a lot of different connotations to it, depending on who you talk to. I'm always puzzled by who will say what when you mention affordances.
What is your least favorite technology word?
My least favorite would be the whole concept of digital natives, because I do think it has created a huge problem, because no one really took ownership of anything. It was a cheap way of just letting things happen.
What technology gets you excited?
At the moment, I think, for good and bad reasons, generative AI, because it's only going to fuel what we've already seen with social media. So if we don't turn around, it will either go really bad, really fast, or we could turn it around and make it good.
What technology turns you off?
I think I'm off, I have to say Facebook, or anything similar. And really, it's not the platform, but now what's happening is the rich are acquiring all these platforms for their own whatever reason they have. And that's really what's turning me off.
Yeah. What technology, sound, or noise do you love?
Oh, I can't forget the modem.
The modem.
Yes, when you plug in your phone and mom was on the phone, oh, who's got the phone? No one knew what was happening, but the sound helped everyone understand someone was trying to connect.
What technology, sound, or noise do you hate?
Hate. I think I have probably trauma over the years of your phone reminding you that you've got an appointment coming up, or the chime, shing. So you immediately go, there's something happening, and you're not quite sure what it is.
Yeah. What is your favorite technology slang word?
I never really thought of that. Slang. Don't know, Rob. I'll have to think of that.
Widget.
What's yours?
Mine's
What's yours?
Widget.
Which it now I'm into, if I have to say, I'll have to say agents at the moment, because there's quite a lot of lots happening in that space purely because of generative AI.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I started as a computer. I wanted to be a computer programmer or engineer, so that's where I started and ended up in education. I don't think I want anything else, because I think this is really good to say. Someone once said that education is a calling, and I really now believe that it is. Purely because I did not plan for this, never thought I'll actually ever do a PhD or I'll be teaching, but I am, and I love it.
What profession would you really not like to do?
Not really like to do. Oh, I don't think I can handle blood, so nothing medicine in the theater.
If technology heaven exists, and this is our last question, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
The technology doesn't exist. I don't know. But that's dependent if you believe in God, so that's another thing.
All right. Well, we're at the 1 hour point. I have to go to class and you have to go pick up your kid. So thank you for your time, Vickel, and sharing with us. And we've already lost over half the people. They know when the questions come, we're letting everything go. So thanks for your time. And we'll see you at the next TELCoP.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for having me. That was brilliant. A good conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you maybe in 6 weeks for the next TELCoP, ladies and gentlemen. Otherwise, thank you, Vickel, so much. Well, regardless, thank you, Vickel, so much for coming along. See you, everyone.